not going to attend. So I advise them in the future to create a purchase order for NISMA just to guesstimate how many kids are going to be there, and then they can adjust when the time comes. The other invoice that came without a purchase order was from the elementary office for the Bugle. I think it was just missed when they did their purchase orders for the year. So I reached out to the principal and asked them to make sure they include the purchase order in their yearly purchase orders for the next school year, since the Bugle comes every year. The next three items on my report are all from the same conference. There was an invoice received from Don Schaumet for a conference for 3 employees on March 10th, but the approval was in my learning plan didn't happen until March 21st and 22nd. In addition to that, 2 of the employees did not include their dollar amount in their conference for mileage reimbursement, so the amount never flowed through to the business office, and then a purchase order was not created. So that caused 2 audit exceptions. I reached out to all 3 employees regarding the importance of waiting until they are fully approved before making any arrangements for conferences with hotels, registrations, or anything like that. And I also explained the importance of making sure to include all costs on their requests, or things like mileage and meal reimbursement may not be approved if the dollar amount isn't there. So the next item on my report is from the food service department on April 22nd. The food service department was working with the high school to offer a workshop creating charcuterie boards with the high school students. And those classes were to be on March 22nd and May 3rd. When the vendor arrived for the workshop on March 22nd, there was nothing in place approving the event. We were missing a board approval, signed contract, there was no purchase order, or a copy of any liability insurance. The vendor also was expecting payment when they arrived. So the high school employee that had been working with food service to set up the event paid for the workshop with their personal credit card and was hoping to be reimbursed later. I had a conversation with both the food service director and the employee, explaining all those missing pieces needed to be in place before the next class in May happened. And then we were getting toward the end of April, there was still a lot of confusion. So I reached out to Pat, and he sat down with the employee and rearranged the conference for the workshop to a later date so everything can be board approved. The next item on my report is from April 29th for services with Smart Choices. The dates of service began on February 9th, but at that time there was no purchase order in place. Once they realized that there was no purchase order, the payment for the vendor was held until they put the certificate, so the vendor could be board approved and they waited for a purchase order in place. I had a conversation with our curriculum director, and they said the issue lied with a miscommunication on when the servicing would actually start. The next item on my report is from food service. An invoice was received without a purchase order in place for RENs. We have an employee that uses a 2-wheel cart, and he needed his tires replaced, and we sent the cart to maintenance, and we didn't realize that they would purchase new tires from RENs. We didn't have a purchase order in place. So we plan for next year to have a purchase order to RENs, the small one, just in case there's any more incidental repairs we need. The next item on my report is from the elementary on May 6th. An employee put in for reimbursement for juice boxes purchased on April 25th, but a purchase order was not approved until April 28th. When I reached out to the employee, they explained that 2 attempts were made to order the juice correctly before this happened. The first time, the vendor was out of stock. The second time, the juice was delivered to the wrong location and never found. And since the juice was meant for diabetic students in the nurse's office, they were afraid they were going to run out and made the purchase without waiting for a purchase order. The last item on my report is another one for mileage reimbursement. An employee put in a my learning plan request on April 26th, attended a conference on April 29th, but their request was not approved till May 3rd. So even though their request was entered before their conference, there was not enough time given for an approval for everything to flow through. So I emailed the employee to make sure that in the future, make sure your conferences are put in sooner. And if something unexpected comes up, to please communicate with whoever is responsible for approving to approve the request. I audited our extracurricular accounts on January 11th. 9 of the accounts were not balanced. There were receipts in many folders showing activity, but students had not sat down to update their books. The good news is once I emailed the business office, my findings, all of the accounts were balanced within 1 to 2 weeks. And next week I'm going to audit the extracurricular accounts again and help the business office close up the year. Does anybody have any questions?
I do. I have a couple. Do you have an estimate of how many transactions you've looked at? I mean, there's 11 exceptions. Do you look at all the transactions? Do you look at a sample of the transactions when you're doing your audit?
I look at everyone.
Okay.
I look at all of them, yes.
All right. And I appreciate the fact that you're reviewing with each employee when you find the exceptions. And I know I've asked this before, but at the beginning of the school year, we do have training for all of the personnel on the proper procedures.
That's correct. Just to Mr. earlier question, Carrie, ballpark of how many, when you say you look at all of them, what are we talking about?
Okay, I was working on them tonight.
Tens, hundreds, thousands? I mean, how many POs are?
It's probably 60 to 100 a week.
A week,
Okay.
and this goes back from January.
Right.
Usually like this thick.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to try to get a perspective on, there's 11 exceptions over 6 months, how many transactions that is, and just to point out that 11 transactions seems like a lot, but when you look at all of the transactions that you looked at, it's really not.
Overall, it's very minimal. And the one had 3 exceptions kind of went with the same conference.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
was even less.
Any other questions?
No.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Have a good night.
I will say, Mr. Grant, to that point though, whenever there is an exception, Carrie notifies me and the business administrator to verify what happened and to determine whether or not to approve the purchase order despite the exception.
Okay. Thank you. Next on our agenda is the public hearing of individuals and delegations. The public comment session is for comment, not for question and answer. It is for community members to share their concerns or thoughts with the board. When speaking, please be sure to approach the podium, state your name and address for the record, and if you're representing an organization, we ask that you identify that. We ask that you maintain a respectful demeanor and tone with your comments. Please direct all comments to the board members and not other members in the audience. We are allowing each individual that has submitted a pink card to speak once and ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes out of respect for others in attendance this evening. We also ask that you do not identify individual staff members or students by name for critical comment. Please direct these matters to the superintendent outside of this meeting during school business hours. In the interest of civility and respect of different points of view, please do not applaud or boo speakers. The board will listen to all public comment, but it should not be expected that the board will respond. The superintendent may respond, or we will request individuals to submit questions in writing so that we can get back to you at a later time. We do have one pink card this evening. Mr. David Miller would like to speak on the Pride Party.
Good evening, everyone. David Miller, 4 Stone Ridge Lane. It's a very strange time when it seems like that school boards are constantly getting berated for things that are going on in the world. But in a time when that happens, I think it's also important for school boards to be recognized when things are handled in a professional manner. I do want to let Mr. McCabe and the school board know that what had transpired over the weekend and the way that was handled for this unannounced pride party, which we all know is a very challenging topic. I think the way that the school board and Mr. McCabe handled this was very professional, and I want to express my appreciation for that. Again, it is one of those topics, one of those situations where it seems like nobody wants to touch it. If you touch it, you almost seem like, oh, you either have to bow in reverence, or you have to, or you're in opposition of it. I think it's pretty clear here with the school board that the school board recognizes every child as being important in this district, every child. And no one child is put above the rest. And I want to thank you for that. It's not common when school districts, especially now, are given praise. And when praise is deserved, you all deserve that. So I want every one of you to recognize that I appreciate what it is that you have done in the last week. I also want to make clear that based on everything that has kind of transpired in the last week, I don't have a problem with putting myself out there because it is such a difficult and an awkward topic. Every one of us want the best for all of our children. All of us. That's what we all want. At that same time, it presents a difficult challenge to ensure that we are equitable in the way that we present how we support those children in our everyday lives. My young son, who is probably the emotional of the two, came to me yesterday and he said to me, "Dad, I had a couple of kids at school that came to me and asked me, did your dad stop the pride party from happening?" As a father that loves to engage himself, does everything he can to engage himself in his child's education, that is a very challenging moment. I sat there for a second. I realized that this particular situation is creating a divide amongst our own children, the children that we swore that we would protect. The individual that decided to do this put their own interests in the forefront, did not have the child's interests at the forefront. Had that been the case, it wouldn't have been sent out at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, set for 9th period today. I think that speaks volumes as to the intent behind the scenario. So again, I want to thank you for the equitable and fair representation of all of our children in the school district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Item 4, committee reports. Recreation Board, Ms. Forstell.
Yes, we had a meeting June 2nd, and it was pretty nice. They handed out their first time award, and the award was named after one of Akron Newstead's recreation volunteers, who's always been a role model even when my kids were in school. And it is called the Bob T. Newstead Recreation Department's Volunteer Coach Award. for 2021, and they gave it to Bob, which was amazing. A lot of tears, but it was good. Forever, this award will be handed out every year now in his honor. He is an amazing coach, and he has been coaching since 1980. They also handed out the award, the Bob Teed Award for 2022 for the Newstead Rec Department Volunteer Award. It went out to Jason Prangle, and he continues that same coaching from the heart and sets a good example for others. And both men were wonderful examples for our children, and we should be very proud of them. So that's something nice that they're going to do yearly, so I thought that was really nice. Regular meeting info, just a few other, they run a tight ship, so just a few other things, like their fees have increased and not by much. Like, it's nothing you would, with today's economy, you got to stay competitive. Even the staff, our kids that help with the coaching during the summer. And registration began Monday, and it's pretty much already filled up. But anything, you can always go on the website and look that up.
I think it filled up in 3 minutes.
Yeah, it was.
And there's a wait list.
Yeah, there's a waiting list, so it's really quick. So it's really good. So, and they're happy to be back in school and swimming.
Happy to have them back.
Yeah.
And I think that the point is to make sure that if somebody didn't get in, to check with the town.
Yep, check with the
Because I
town
do
and do
believe
so.
that recreation is trying to make some adjustments based off of staffing.
Yeah, they might
So
add
typically,
more.
they may have a typical, certain sections based off of a particular size, but because some sizes are smaller than others, and some have waiting lists where the others don't, they're gonna try and shuffle things around to better accommodate and call those on the will call
Yeah,
to
it's a
try
little
and
hard
make that.
since COVID, right? I mean.
Yeah,
you
it
know,
really is.
They're trying to get back, and then how much further do you get back, and you're not sure what you're gonna get, and so.
And the rec program is phenomenal just from the standpoint that I can just speak on behalf of my family. My kids both went through the rec program, and now they end up becoming lifeguards or volunteers or whatever. So it's a continuing progression from
Well, even-
student to
Even the board on the
teacher.
rec were ex-coaches,
Yes,
so it's very cool.
So
very good.
that's great to hear. We have an expanded summer program that is now offering some outside recreation and physical activity to
Okay.
keep the kids engaged. So coordinating of and sharing of the facilities will just be, it's a good problem to have, but we'll rely on the rec department and our administrators to hash that out. That's
Okay,
great news.
that's right. That's that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
ECASB delegate did not meet, there's nothing to report. ECASB legislative, Mr. Polkowski.
Nothing to report. We had our last meeting. So at this point, we don't have anything other than getting some additional information into, like New York State School Boards Association roundups, just some final information in regards to what happened over the last legislative session. I will be trying to reach out to a couple of the representatives over the course of the break. Specifically, the one that I'm trying to target is Mr. Hawley, as his district has changed and now incorporates all of Newstead, whereas it was only a small percentage before. So it was a significant change from Mike Norris's region into Hawley's, and other than one meeting, we haven't met with him before. So I'm sure he'd be willing to maybe set up a town hall or something over the course of the summer to just have a communication and meet his constituents within Newstead. So.
And I did have an opportunity to meet with the two of them and talk about a transition at the appropriate time, and to get him here on campus and to tour the campus and to meet with the board.
Okay, great, thank you both. ECASB budget and finance, Mr. Kenline is not here. Mr. Massey, anything?
No.
Right. Native American Committee, Ms. Forstell?
They canceled for today due to lacrosse.
Okay. Which will segue into Mr. McCabe's
Right.
report.
Speaking of the lacrosse team,
Yeah,
so
right.
our varsity lacrosse team, congratulations to them on just an absolutely incredible season. Section 6 Class D champs, Far West regional champs. Their season unfortunately ended today in a 20-13 loss in the state semifinal game. Their accomplishments nonetheless are incredibly admirable, and impressive. The way the school celebrated today by sending them off was fun. It was a great community building activity for the entire district. So, having said that, congratulations to them, to all of our athletes at all of our levels. We really hope to see more kids getting involved in all of our extracurriculars, not just athletics, but we have this fantastic music and art program. We have so many clubs and extracurriculars and intramurals, and as you just said, the town offers so many opportunities, and not just our department, other organizations within the town and the Akron-Newstead community. So congratulations to all of our teams, and hopefully this excites more kids, quite honestly, to get involved in any passion they hope to pursue. So with that, I'm going to transition over there. I do have just an update for the board on kind of some information sharing given recent events really relative to safety, school safety and threats. So I'm just going to transition. So the intent of my comments today, we could be here, and I know you don't want to listen to Pat for 45 minutes, but we could be here seriously for a very long time if I were to attempt to give the board and the community a comprehensive, in-depth view of all of our safety operations. I am not. I am here to give you just a small window, a sliver of information relative to how we respond to the specific instance of a threat. Okay, so it's narrow in scope. So it's truly just an overview. I'm going to start, before you hit Paul, this video I thought did a nice synopsis of some of the critical elements you should have when evaluating a threat. It's about 2 minutes long, and it was produced in 2015. He speaks to a study, this is schoolthreats.org, speaks to a study that was done in 2015.
Schools across the nation have been hit with a wave of violent school threats. About 70% in our study of more than 800 threats involve shooting and/or bomb threats. More than 30% of the schools evacuated. About 10% actually shut down for at least one school day. And we know that these threats are disrupting school communities and creating a great deal of anxiety among students, parents, staff, and the entire school community. We need to make sure that our schools are assessing threats and then reacting, not reacting and then assessing. Schools can best address threats by having threat assessment teams, threat assessment training, and threat assessment protocols in partnership with their law enforcement and other first responders so that they're ready to hit the ground when these threats hit their school community. We need to be prepared ahead of time as to how we're going to tackle these threats, work through some hypothetical tabletop exercises and scenarios before we ever experience these threats in our school community. Today's threats are coming from multiple sources. We have oftentimes threats that are coming from students and former students and those with local ties in the community that receives the threat. But we also have a phenomenon known as swatting, where the threats can come from across state and even international borders, and the FBI can end up at your schoolhouse door as a law enforcement partner investigating these wide-ranging type of threats. And of course, we need to treat seriously the whole terrorism threat and things associated with that, as well as day-to-day threats from non-custodial parents to students who make some very bad choices. We encourage you to visit our website at schoolsecurity.org to look at the 2015 School Threat Assessment Study. It has some fascinating data that can help you focus your plans. We encourage you not only to have school emergency plans and threat assessment plans, but also school crisis communications plans so that you're prepared to communicate with students, staff, and parents and the media when one of these incidents occurs in your community. Our website, schoolsecurity.org, has information on those school crisis communications best practices as well. Keep your students safe, have threat assessment protocols, crisis communications plans, and we can avoid putting children in unsafe situations and less safe situations by overreacting and instead making good threat assessment decisions on the front end when they strike our school communities. Schools across the nation have been hit with a wave of violent
Should
school
be able to
threats.
just pause him.
About 70% in our study of more than 800 threats involve shooting and/or bomb threats. More than 30.
There we go, I got it. Thank you, Paul. So, you know, I like that video because I think it gives a general overview. What I'm going to do now is try to narrow the funnel a little bit of information. I'm going to speak specifically to this notion of how we have been planning and preparing to handle threats that come in, and also talk about some future practices. So again, the intent of this overview is to provide you, the Board of Education, our community members who are here with us or maybe watching online, with just some foundational understanding of some of the key components of a threat assessment process. Those key components include a multidisciplinary team, the ability to define the behavior that's presented, evaluation and classification of threats, the actual threat assessment process itself, the intervention management, and then to inform you of some next steps for Akron Central Schools. In regard to that multidisciplinary team, it is comprised of school administrators, school mental health professionals, our school resource officers, our local police department and other emergency responders, our outside threat management specialists, I'm going to be talking about that in an upcoming slide, and on occasion, other outside mental health therapists and specialists. It's important to note that this is not the complete list. As I indicated, there's the occasion, for example, to reach out to the county DA's office, for example, if we need to determine what legal steps might need to take place, again, contingent on the nature of the threat. This is critical information in the slide, and it's talking about defining concerning and prohibited behaviors. So there is a key distinction between making a threat and posing a threat. So what is a threat? A threat is an expression of intent to physically harm someone. It may be verbal, it may be written, it may be gestured, it may be a piece of art or drawing. But the nature of it is, and I'll use kind of a graphic explanation, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to hit you, I'm going to punch you, I'm going to blank. That's a threat, by definition, an intent to cause harm. But again, there's a distinction between making a threat and actually posing a threat. So let's drill down on that notion a bit. There's something called a transient threat. It's the expression of anger, of frustration. Sometimes it can be attempted humor. I'm going to kill you. Some of us have probably said that. Still an intent to cause harm. Maybe not intent, but an expression of intent. Often it can be done just to gain attention. In particular, with some of the things that we see both in person but also online, it can be an attempt to disrupt the learning and school environment. These viral threats that get spread from community to community or within school communities. Then there is a substantive threat. This represents a serious intent to cause harm that involves plans and a means. You see the note at the bottom of the slide. In case of doubt, if you're not sure, all threats are considered substantive until proved otherwise. So the evaluation and classification of a threat. Here on campus, we have a multidisciplinary team of trained professionals that's responsible for the overall threat assessment protocol, including the administration of a threat assessment evaluation tool. I'm going to be talking about the tool we use in just a second. The threat assessment involves evaluation and classification of the threat and the appropriate response and intervention. So we talked about using a protocol such as this to evaluate and then classify. Is it transient? Is it substantive? There's also something called, where is the child on the path to violence? From there, we need to determine what our appropriate level of response is. And obviously with a threat, we've talked about threats, we know what they are, your response is going to be different and your intervention is going to be different. It involves notification involvement of parents, and in some cases, the development of a written safety plan when necessary. Here's the thing. We have a responsibility to act quickly while also communicating information in a confidential manner. We're dealing with, in some cases, very young children. When they make comments, it's our responsibility to protect their confidentiality as we do communicate with the appropriate people, but all in a quick and concise manner, but as you saw in the video, without spreading unnecessary alarm until we can effectively determine where we are in our response. So I've referenced this a couple times, the threat assessment evaluation tool, and I did receive, so the board is aware, I received some emails from very concerned community members. How do you know that your evaluation was thorough enough, was effective enough? It's difficult to ease a person's emotional concerns for their child. I understand that, we all do. But that being said, we also recognize that we are dealing with the most precious thing our community and our families have, which is children. So our trained professionals administer these tools with fidelity and with great cognizance of the severity that could happen if they're not doing due diligence. So currently, we have an administrator, and actually ended up in Carrie's report a minute ago about the training, as our social workers who have been trained using a tool called Assess and Progress, Student Safety Assessment and Growth Intervention Program, version 22.1, which was just updated this year by Don Schumach. In addition to the folks that have gone to Don's training, and I've been through Don's training twice, he's outstanding. He's used by a lot of law enforcement agencies as well as school. We also have psychologists and school counselors that have had other similar training, not exactly using, there's many threat assessment protocols. This very thick binder is the threat assessment protocol. It's quite in depth. It also includes follow through with the child based on the outcome of the evaluation. The level and degree of law enforcement can vary from just consultative to direct oversight, where they take over the investigation themselves. If it's a threat, first of all, it's a simple paradigm of threat, no threat. If there's no threat, they're not on a pathway to violence. If there is a threat, they're somewhere on that pathway to violence. It could be just an idea, it could be just motion. It could go all the way far to elaborate plan. So depending on where they are, also impacts the degree of which law enforcement becomes involved. So they can do the investigation, they do the risk management actions, and they will appropriately collaborate with the judicial system. A part of the assessment process is data collection. So decisions are made by threat assessment. They're only as good as the data you collect. And the data that is collected also has to be corroborated. If you've ever worked with young children or even high school age children, you've got to check and double check their stories as you're doing the investigation. Data sources include, but are not limited to, the ones you see on the screen. We go back, we look at the child's academic and discipline records, we look at their mental health records if there are any. We talk to law enforcement to find out if there are any existing records. We search backpack lockers if there's a car on district property. In the cases of at home, we work with law enforcement to get search warrants for room, home, vehicle, if appropriate. You're all familiar with the red flag law. We can implement the red flag law if necessary. That's where, under suspicion, the law enforcement can check for and seize weapons. The internet history and activity can be challenging to do. It is done. Obviously, it's usually often done most effectively when we have students who are cooperating. They bring it to the attention of the administrator. This is what I saw on TikTok. This is the feed that was sent to me. This was the email I got or the social message I got. In some cases, we're able to look at students' notebooks, diaries, as I mentioned earlier, drawings. and the social media administrator. All of this is happening by the multidisciplinary team. Oftentimes, there are usually 2 individuals talking to the child and other people on the team doing some of this additional data collection. In terms of intervention management, for a low-risk situation, we've had some situations, thankfully, that were low-risk here on campus. Other districts have too. And I want you to have perspective here. I had the opportunity to go to the JMT last week. Some of you know that's all superintendents from our area. School safety, the use of resource officers, threat assessment was a major focus of not only our training workshop, but also of our collegial dialogue. Every district is dealing with this to varying degrees, particularly this spring after the horrific incidents in Buffalo and Uvalde. So I'm proud that our district hasn't acted in this purely reactive mode, but rather we have been proactive prior to my tenure and including during my tenure to advance our overall school safety and our responses to situations like this. Hearing the conversations, and I'm segueing for just a second, hearing the conversations from our neighboring districts in our region and also other districts, it's a rarity to have 2 uniformed armed law enforcement on campus all day and oftentimes during our extracurriculars. Smaller districts and rural communities are often served by 1 or 2 sheriffs that have multiple school districts in their jurisdiction. They can't get there. They don't have SROs. Even in urban settings, they don't. We're very fortunate to have our relationship with the Akron. So, nonetheless, that was the second one. But for low-risk situations with a particular child, it's usually informal monitoring, supportive interventions as appropriate. However, for moderate to high-risk situations, the intervention management looks very different. You have formal monitoring. You have prescriptive interventions, typically forms of counseling in and outside of school. Follow-up meetings with the individual and the team. Multidisciplinary team review is required. The team is responsible to create its written plan, to reevaluate it, and make adjustments as needed. Enhancing school climate and expectations. So the goal here, folks, is to have a good plan in place, obviously. But parallel goal is to prevent an occurrence of these situations in the first place. So prevention, mitigation of threats rely on relationships and connections among students, staff, and the community. Kids need to feel safe that they can go tell. Community members need to bring to the attention to district administrators. Staff need to do it. But also there has to be a relationship where they don't occur in the first place. We have to work on trust, respect, and empowerment to report concerns. Now I have to say, a comment was made during my conference that they're seeing more and more kids reporting stuff. He says that kind of stuff all year, but they're starting to tell now out of their sense of responsibility after Uvalde and after Buffalo. That's a good thing. It really is. Kids need to feel valued. And I said this at our last board meeting. I'm not going to continue to preach on this subject. But what is the connecting line between some of these tragedies? They're children that were disenfranchised in their own schools, coming back to the economy. They have to put an end to that cycle. So we are working, and we have been working, and I've reported to the board numerous times, on wellness, social emotional learning, embedded into the curriculum, not tacked on, but woven in. It's everyone's responsibilities. So their daily experiences of student life is such that they feel valued, that they feel joy, and that they feel connected. In terms of some of our next steps, and by no means is this an exhaustive list, we do have our interagency safety meeting scheduled for tomorrow. I've told the board about this a few times. Grateful to our emergency responders, Akron PD, and Wallach for coming to that meeting. Our Erie One BOCE Safety Risk Management Specialist, Chris Scumo, and I have been working on the agenda. We had planned, and I know I told the board this once before, we had planned this months ago prior to the recent tragedies. It was delayed in May because of Dennis, our facilitator, came down with COVID, so we rescheduled for tomorrow. Our focus was just again on one small sliver, which was the parent-student reunification process after a school evacuation. Like, we spent a whole detailed meeting just on doing a tabletop exercise of how are we going to block off the street, where are we going to block off the street, where is the command center, where is the communication center. There are pictures of our offsite location, room by room, of what classroom will go where, what teacher. The staff has been trained on this. This was intended to be our, okay, let's walk through a mock scenario. We're still going to do that. We still think that we haven't done that yet this year. We want to do that, but we're going to also reserve time in tomorrow's meeting to talk about our own current district safety and security. I asked Mr. Sculo to create a survey to our staff, being our eyes and ears. Where do you see that we're vulnerable? And the staff were great. They responded with narrative on things that we can do to tighten up security. I had a chance to review it. Door security is always going to be a concern. We have this many exits, making sure they're not propped open or left open. And they had a variety of things. So the interagency safety team is going to look at that data set, and we're going to start to modify and communicate plans and changes. This summer, we have the Office of Homeland Security coming right here to Akron to do a school district crisis management training for emergency responders throughout the region. I'm registered. It's a 2-day training. I'll be attending. You know that the district develops and implements its district emergency management plan annually. That will be happening again. We need to further develop the district crisis communication plan. I'm going to reach out to some colleagues to see if they'll share resources. Our staff has asked, our bus drivers, our teachers have asked for more training. They want to be involved at level 1, so we're working on training. Won't be probably to the new school year. And then I mentioned in the previous slide this threat assessment training for all of our support staff. We only have a few so far trained in this particular tool. We want to have more folks trained. This is a 2-day, 16-hour training with an assessment at the end to verify that you're, there's no certification, but for lack of a better word, certified to do this work, and then have ongoing support for those folks. That's my overview. Are there questions from the board?
I just have a general comment that I'm just so thankful for the number of SROs that we have in our building. I'm in an elementary school that has no SROs, and I feel very fortunate the number we have, that are visibly seen every day. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Likewise, I had a fantastic school resource officer who on his route drove through once a day and was in my building for, an hour and a half, maybe on campus. It was same as our set up here in Akron, K-12 campus, maybe on campus for 2 hours a day, unless he got called off. We have dedicated law enforcement right here. So, anything else from the board?
Thank you for the presentation. We appreciate it. And to our school resource officers, thank you, gentlemen.
I didn't even know I was giving you guys a plug back then. You're back. Is that why you came? I do have more information for the board, and thank you for the opportunity to give that update. In your packet, you'll find a revised organizational chart that was created to reflect the alignment of administrative positions within the district. The function of an organizational chart is to assist the board and other district stakeholders to understand the channels in which communication, dialogue, information, and decision-making ultimately flow. As you know, we've had some change in administrative positions. We've brought some new folks in. There was a need to do some updates and alignment. I always want to pause when we look at an organizational chart and it's this very linear kind of top-down table format to say, well, that may be the way you need to depict it, and ultimately it is the way in which information and communication flows, kind of bottom up for decision-making purposes. The most effective school districts, the most effective administrative teams truly do work as an interactive web of collegial and professional dialogue, support, decision-making, information. So I feel that our administrative team really does function as that interactive web. Final comment on it, you may recall, it might have been last year, the organizational chart is no longer a matter of board policy, but it's really the responsibility of the superintendent to create and manage. Should I ever make any other changes to the organizational chart, as I'm doing tonight, I'm presenting it to you, but I'm also soliciting your input. If you have concerns or questions about it, I'm certainly willing and interested in hearing those things. So are there any?
No.
Okay. Just one final bit of information / inquiry. The Akron Celebration Committee, the annual 4th of July parade. As you know, for many years, the committee has used our district parking lots as a place to stage for the parade, the vehicles, the marching units. Does the board have any reservations of allowing them to use our parking lots again? They don't have, the organization doesn't have a specific insurance policy for the use of our lots. They do have their individual vehicle policies, but I want to make sure that the board is comfortable with our community group using our campus for that purpose. Absolutely.
We're good.
Okay. That's all I have, unless you have any questions for me.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McCabe. Item 6 is personal instructional. We have a probationary appointment to consider. Ryan Carberry, physical education. Our recommended action is that the Akron Central School Board of Education, upon the recommendation of Patrick D. McCabe, Superintendent of Schools, hereby appoints Ryan Carberry, who holds professional certification in the physical education area, to a probationary position in the physical education tenure area for a probationary period commencing on September 1st, 2022 and expiring on August 31st, 2025, unless extended in accordance with the law. This expiration date is tentative and conditional only, except to the extent required by the applicable provisions of Section 3012 of the Education Law. In order to be granted tenure, the teacher must receive composite or overall annual professional performance review ratings pursuant to Section 3012C and/or 3012D of the Education Law of either effective or highly effective in at least 3 of the 4 preceding years. And if the teacher receives an ineffective composite or overall rating in the final year of the probationary period, the teacher shall not be eligible for tenure at that time. Salary for the school year 2012-23 will be in accordance with the district AFA collective bargaining agreement based on Schedule 2, Step 5.
Moved.
Moved, Mrs. Kaye.
Second.
Second, Ms. Forrestal. Questions or comments?
I just told him to buy some orange and black and get rid of the purple. He's been warned.
Motion carried.
Ryan's here tonight. Ryan's a 2011 graduate of Akron Central. Congratulations and welcome back.
Just a quick comment to the board. Fastest reference check I ever had to do. I called the superintendent and he screamed no on the phone when I went to do his reference check. So, that in and of itself says that, Ryan, the folks that you work with in your previous district think very highly of you. You're certainly one of their top employees. Ryan and I have gotten to know each other a little bit this year through our shared work in the Niagara Orleans Athletic League.
Item 7 is personnel instructional. Our recommended action is that the Akron Central School Board of Education, upon the recommendation of Patrick D. McCabe, Superintendent of Schools, does hereby approve instructional items consent 7A to 7N.
Moved.
Moved, Mr. Massey.
Second.
Second, Ms. Forrestal. Questions or comments? Thank you. I'd like to point out, prior to our meeting, we had a reception for our newly appointed 10-year teachers and their families, as well as honoring our retirees, many of whom had family members with us. There were over 50 people in attendance this evening. It was great to see them and acknowledge them. I would like to recognize them. None of them are here at this point, but Molly Belinsky, Laura Boeing, Julie Castiglione, Emily Drum, Gabriella Foster, Madeline Kuhn, Sheila Medor, Michaela Nowak, Catherine Welnowski, Danielle Whitside. Congratulations to all of them. Item 8, personnel non-instructional. Our recommended action is that the Akron Central School Board of Education, upon the recommendation of Patrick D. McCabe, Superintendent of Schools, does hereby approve non-instructional items consent 8A to 8K.
Move.
Moved, Mrs. K.A.
Second.
Second, Mr. Polkowski. Questions or comments?
Motion carried.
Thank you. Item 9, district items. Our recommended action is that the Akron Central School Board of Education, upon the recommendation of Patrick D. McCabe, Superintendent of Schools, does hereby approve district items consent 9A to 9G.
Move.
Moved, Mr. Massey.
Second.
Second, Ms. Forrestal. Questions or comments?
Motion carried.
I'd also like to point out that Mr. Alexander was there this evening, and we graciously approved his tenure. Item 10, special education. Our recommended action is that the Akron Central School Board of Education, upon the recommendation of Patrick D. McCabe, Superintendent of Schools, does hereby approve special education items consent 10A to 10B.
Move.
Moved, Ms. Forrestal.
Second.
Second, Mrs. K.A. Questions or comments?
Motion carried.
Thank you. Item 11, school board correspondence, Saturday, June 11th, EAC ASB Part 2 Governance Training at Erie One BOCES from 8 to 12. Tuesday, June 21st, ECASB Part 1 Fiscal Oversight Training virtually from 6:15 to 8:15 in the evening. And Saturday, June 25th, ECASB Part 2 Fiscal Oversight Training, Erie One BOCES from 8 to 12 in the morning. Upcoming dates, Thursday, June 9th, in the High School Academic and Athletic Awards Assembly in the auditorium from 8:15 to 10:45. Friday, June 10th is the Junior Senior Prom at Buffalo Lighthouse Room, 6 to 10. Monday, June 13th, our Board of Education Professional Development Retreat in room C120 from 6 to 10. Tuesday, June 14th, the elementary outdoor days from 8:30 to 2:15. Friday, June 17th, grades 1 through 5 awards assembly in the auditorium from 9 to 10:15. Friday, June 17th, the kindergarten celebration in the auditorium from 1:15 to 2:30. Monday, June 19th is the Juneteenth observation, no school. Wednesday, June 22nd, prior to our board meeting at 6:30, there'll be a public hearing on the district-wide safety plan here at 6:30 in the cafeteria, followed by our Board of Education meeting in the cafeteria at 7. And Friday, June 24th is graduation in the auditorium at 7 o'clock. It is great to see all the year-end celebrations. It's a busy calendar for sure. Item 12, board discussion. Any items from the board you wish to bring up? Item 14, executive session. We do have the need to go into executive session this evening to discuss pending litigation and the employment history of a particular person. If we could have a motion, please.
Move.
Moved, Ms. Forstell.
Second.
Second, Mrs. K.A. Questions, comments?
Motion carried.
All right, we are in executive session, 8 o'clock. We do not intend to conduct any business after coming out of executive session. Thank you to everyone for attending this evening.